In this video and in the next one, we are going to consider a concept in React which is called controlled and uncontrolled components. So in React, a controlled component is a component which has a form or input elements where the value of those input elements is controlled by React. That is called controlled component. And if a component has some form and and it has some input elements in which the value of those input elements are not controlled by React. Rather, the value means the actual state which is stored inside that value. If that is taken care by the DOM itself, then that is called uncontrolled component. In this video, firstly we'll see uncontrolled component, and in the next one we are going to see that what is a controlled component. So let's firstly have a look at uncontrolled component. So let's say there is a form, and inside that form let's say a particular input element is there, and let's say that input element type is text. Okay, and then let's say we have a button. Okay, and that button will submit whatever the value inside this input element is there. Okay, so straightforward, we'll have something like a value like this, where yeah, this thing is coming from outside, but right now we just created this form which renders an input and a submit button. Okay, now what happens is that here what we want is that when we submit, then we want to call a function. Okay, so let's create that function. Let's call it handle submit. Okay, and then we can use that function here. So this function will be called when the particular button is clicked. And we know that here we could have used input type submit also, but we could directly use button also, whose type by default is submit. Okay, now inside this form, this button is there. When this button is clicked, then the form will be submitted. When the form will be submitted, then this function will be called. This function will be called, then what it is going to do, it has event, and we don't want to post this form to this page itself. When we learned about form submission, then we learned that, right? So what we want to firstly do prevent default, so that it is actually not submitted, rather just this function is called. Okay, so after that whatever we do, that is fine. So let's say we simply write name, and then what will be the value. So that value yeah, so that is fine. So somehow we have to tap into the DOM. So we know that internally it will be available. We can extract that values from event also, but right now we want to do it in the React way. In order to get access to the DOM of any particular element, what we do, we use ref. Okay, so in functional component we use something called use ref hook. In case of class-based components, which is the case right now, we will do something called create ref. Okay, so what we are going to do is that we will have firstly a constructor, and that constructor we have to pass the props to the super. So we will do it, and after that let's have some ref. Let's call that ref input, and this will be react dot create ref. Okay, so now this dot input is a ref, and how we use ref, whatever DOM we want to access, we simply pass ref is equal to this dot input, right? Now when we click, then what we want to get the value from this ref. Okay, so how do we get that? First of all, we have to use the current, and then inside that value is the property in which the value will be there. Okay, right now if you see that if I simply submit, then name and empty string is there, and that is expected because we have not written anything. Okay, but we will see that, let's say, as soon as we start typing anything, so let's say anything we write, so Alex or Bob, whatever we write, finally whenever we submit, then we can see that that value is captured here. Okay, because whatever we have written, that is inside this elements DOM. So that's what that's why this thing is called uncontrolled component, because there is no such value, there is no such state in this component where actually this name Bob is stored. There is no such state, right? There is no such variable. Actually, this is stored inside the DOM in this element, and if we want to get access to that value, then we have to tap into the actual DOM reference, and from that reference we can extract this value, and that's how it is happening. Okay, but one more thing, let's say initially we see that when it got rendered, then it is empty. What if initially we want to render something? So you can see that this input thing is there, right? So what happens is that there is a property called default value, and in this default value you can pass whatever value you want to pass it. Okay, so let's say there is some name Mary, and if you pass here, then that name will come. Let's say we don't want this name, but what we want, that whatever name is coming from here, okay, that name we want to use, then very well you can use that also. Okay, so initially you will see that this thing is rendered with the same name which is passed as a prop. Now one more thing, this default value, so what is its purpose? Its purpose is to populate the initial value. So default value will be whenever there is no such value initially, because obviously initially nothing is there. So what is the initial value you want to get started with? So that is the default value. If after rendering, even if you change this value, so let's say this thing is some prop or state or some other variable, whatever, if once it has rendered, after that if you change, it does not matter. So for example, you can see here that let's say I click change name, then you can see that this name has changed, then obviously this .props.name would have also changed, right? Because this is actually only used here. So you can see that this has changed, but still this value has not changed. Why? Because at the time of first render of the particular input element, whatever is the value at that point of time, only that value is read only once, and after that it is never touched. Okay, so this is what an uncontrolled component in React looks like. Now I have just given you an example with input type text, right? But then let's say other types, radio, checkbox, or whatever select select element, any sort of input element which is available in HTML and JSX for that matter, will have the same concept. Whenever the value of the input field is not controlled by some state or something, rather the value of the input field is controlled by is available inside the DOM itself. Some essentially, if React is controlling the input or for that matter any other input type text field or any other field, if that value is controlled by React, then it is called controlled component. Right now you can see that it is just inside the DOM as a state, right? It is not a state of the component, it is state of the DOM itself. So that is the only difference. Now with a slight variation, so for example, let's say here instead of input type text, let's say input type let's say checkbox is there, right? Then some differences will be there. So let's say type checkbox and let's say all is well, and there is a checkbox, right? So you can see that this is also working, right? Now again, this thing, whether this thing is checked or not, this state is obviously not inside our component, right? So again, if it is checked and you want to get the value whether it is checked or not, the only way to do is in uncontrolled component is you take this, you not take this, create a separate some other ref, let's say checkbox input or something, and then have that ref, and inside that you will get input dot current whatever, so checkbox input dot current dot checked. In that variable you will get its value, okay? But obviously you will not get you are not controlling it by some state variable or something, and that's why this is uncontrolled, with the slight difference that here you are using default value. Here actually the prop for setting its initial value, if you, so obviously by default it is you can see that by default it is not checked, right? You can pass something called default checked, like here it was default value, here you can pass default checked, and you can pass something like true, and then you can see that by default it is checked. So these are the small variations which you can use on various different types. You might need to go through the documentation, but I give you the basic idea what is the concept of an uncontrolled component. Now whatever we did right now, we did it in a class component, right? Exactly the same thing we could translate as it is to a functional component, okay? So for example, you can see that in a functional component it will be almost same, just that instead of create react.create ref, we will use ref hook, and we will get a particular reference. You can name, here I named it input, here also you can name it input, but let's say I named it input ref. Apart from that, whatever, so you can see that now wherever this dot input is used directly, the name of the reference you have to use, because there is no this in class component. And apart from that, rest everything is same. This is props dot name rather than this dot props dot name, and as it is. And you can see that if we change the class component and use function component rather, then you can see that it still works. So whatever you are using, it was initialized with helix, and whatever you change, so as it is working fine, right? So you can see that exactly in the same manner you can use the same in functional component also. And again, this type checkbox, the same thing, exactly the same thing you can do here also, okay? So that's not a difference at all. So that will be all for uncontrolled components. Next we will see controlled components. But you might wonder that yeah, this thing is working fine, right? Then why we need to use, and in fact this is less code also, right? Not much code. So why do we need something called controlled components? Turns out that controlled components will have a bit more code than what we already did, because we will use some state and use that state and connect that state to the something called value in each of the input elements. But why are we doing that extra additional step? Is in order to have more control over a particular input element, and that's why it is called controlled component. And why it might be a good idea to take control over a particular input element, because sometimes it might be fine that yeah, whatever I'm writing, that is fine, right? But sometimes it might be a good idea that you have a better control over it. Why? Because let's say somebody writes something like this, a number in name, okay? Then here you can see that I don't have any control. User can write anything and then it will work fine, right? But let's say I want that, no, it cannot be like this. It has to be only characters, okay? And or let's say somebody wrote their name like completely like in caps, okay? But then you want that, no, it should be like either all lowercase, or let's say only first character is allowed to be uppercase, which means that you are not allowed to do something like this, you should do something like this. Then in some of the websites you might have seen that let's say they are forcing you to write capital letters, right? So even if you write small bob, then automatically you are writing small b, but actually there it is being written capital bob, something like this automatically. So that transformation internally, that what you are typing and what is actually visible is different. So either you can do transformation like this, or you can do trimming like this. So let's say somebody wrote bob 99, then 99 you will write, then automatically whatever you are writing, that thing, the characters will remain, and the other things like numbers or etc will be automatically deleted. So all those things, so which means that even if you write some numbers or something, or you will type, but that will not be visible, that will not be going inside the input element. So that can only happen when you can have a bit of code which does this controlling, and that can only happen when you have the control over the value of this input element. Okay, and that we'll see that in the next video. This one is all about uncontrolled components. So see you in the next one.